In this example, we're going to learn about operator overloading in C++. So to start off with, I have a class that has a private member A. It has a constructor, and it has a print method. And then I've created three variables in my main method, C1, C2, and result. And then I'll print out their initial values. So if I compile this, you can see that we print out their initial values. So suppose what I wanted to do was something like this. Cout C plus 1, C1 plus C2 is equal to, and then I'll print C1a, C2a is equal to their sum. And I'm going to get errors because that's private. So you may be tempted to say, well, I know how to fix that. There we go. No compile errors, and it works the way I want. However, again, the point is not to fix the compile errors. It's to write your code so that it does what you want in the proper way. And we don't want to have our class members public in most cases. So what we're going to do here is we're going to overload some operators. So the first operator we're going to overload is the addition operator. And I'm going to define my overloaded operator. And the way to do that is to overwrite the method operator and then the name of the operator that you want to override. And the parameter is going to be a const MyClass reference. And we'll call it that. That's the other thing. We'll define this outside the class just to give you another example of doing that. So to be clear, this method, even though it's defined outside the actual class definition, is still part of the class. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to make a new MyClass object. And notice that our constructor sets an X, so I'm going to pass as the constructor this A. Notice this is a pointer, so I'm using an arrow notation, plus that A. Notice that as a reference, so just like with a variable, I would use dot notation. And then I'm going to return ret. Now you may say, why are you returning a local variable? Well, I'm not. I'm copying this variable into this variable, the return type. So this actually is safe. And I need to indicate that this is part of the MyClass class. So I'll put that in there. So now what I can do, and before I actually do this, I'm going to say result is equal to C1 plus C2. Notice those are MyClass objects. And I'll print result. And when I do that, I get an error 39. Forgot to type indel there. That should be a dot. And you can see now result is equal to 2. Now, just to show you that that's not, or that was because of us overloading this operator, if I comment that out and compile, I'm going to get an error. that says no match for operator plus operand types are MyClass and MyClass. So on this line, it didn't like it because I don't know how to add MyClass and MyClass. Now, to be clear, this is equivalent to doing result equals C1.operator plus C2. And I need to change that to actually C2. Right, so this, when I do this, I have an object and a plus. That's the same as calling the operator plus method for this object, and I pass it C2. So let's uncompile this above so that we can see that, yes, that does in fact work. Okay, very good. Going back to our first example, you can already see that we can do a lot of this stuff. But actually, before we do that, let's, just to demonstrate what we can do, C1 operator. Actually, we can't quite do that yet. Let me go back. Okay, yeah, let's stay here. Okay, so it would be really nice if we could actually print C2 out, something like, so we take this line, but instead of all of this, what if we just said C1 plus C2 is equal to C1 plus C2, and then also C1 plus C2 in line, right? If these were just numbers or integers, that would work. So if I compile this, though, you'll see that we get an error. No type, name type. Well, let's always go to the first error in C++. And that's going to tell us what we did wrong. And you'll see there's no match for operator. And look, there's our stream injection operator. Now notice the operand types are this OS stream and then MyClass. So what we're going to want to do is create a method. Now this is not going to be part of the class because notice that first operand is an O stream, which is an output stream. So into MyClass, we're going to return O stream, and it's going to be a reference. Operator, stream injection operator. It's going to take a reference to a stream and a reference to a MyClass object. And what we're going to do is notice stream is already a stream. So I'm going to use the stream injection operator to put a brace, m.a, and a closing brace. And then I'm going to return stream. And the reason we're going to do this is because we want to return this reference, and we want to make sure that once we return that, we still have that stream active so that we can inject multiple things into that stream. So let's compile this and see what happens. So you'll notice my pro tip that I scrolled up a little bit before it compiled so that now I can just see what's there. Now notice my problem here is that MyClass A is private. And that's a real bummer because how am I going to fix that if I can't see A? Now I could do a getter and a setter, but maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want, I don't want arbitrary access to that function. Well, C++ has a feature called a friend. And the nice thing about friends is friends can see private members. So I'm going to say that I have a friend, and it's this function. Notice it's like a function declaration, but I'm declaring that it's a friend. Now when I define this function, since I've told that it's a friend, is going to have access to my private members. Now if I run this, notice it printed exactly what we would expect. You want to be careful using friends because clearly this breaks encapsulation, but it is controlled. this function or this method can't say, oh yeah, I'm totally my class's friend, let me in. My class has to say that this is the friend. So you do have a little bit of control over who's going to be your friends and who's not going to be your friends. Okay, so let's do some more overloads. Suppose we just want to add an integer. Well, that's actually, that's going to be very similar to this one, so much so that I'm going to copy and paste it. And it's going to take an integer x. And just like we had before, except instead of adding that, which is from the class, we're going to add x, and we're going to return our return. So now, I can do something like this, C1 plus 10, and then I'll say 10 here. Or actually, how about if I define this up here? And then I'll say num. Num is C1 plus C2 plus num. Oh wait, C1 plus num, there we go. So if I compile this and run, notice it added 1 plus 10 and created a new object, which you can tell because when I printed it out, I got those braces around the number. Now, hopefully at this point you're saying, what if we did num plus C2? So let's do that. And you'll notice we get an error. So we'll do our trick again so that we can see what it is. No match for operator plus. That's weird. Operand types are int and MyClass. Keep in mind, when we have this operator, the first operand is the first parameter. So we don't have an int method to add, so we're going to need to write a new function. So let's go back to our code. And it's actually going to still be similar to this. So let's copy and paste that. But now, the first parameter, first off, it's not going to be part of MyClass. But it is going to return a MyClass object. And it's going to take a const MyClass reference that, called that. And actually, let me put a space here, just so that's clear. And this is going to return that a plus x. But when we compile, notice we get some errors. It's private, so we need to say, hey, this method is also my friend. So hopefully you kind of can see if you want to know, hey, I want to use this object in some way, well, you use it, see what error you get, and it'll tell you. You can overload most operators in C++. And this will always tell you what the two operands are. And if the first operand is your object, or an object of your class, then you can make that a class method. Otherwise, you can make a friend method like we did here. So it compiled, we run it, and it produces the output we would expect. So one thing to keep in mind is when you're doing this, to do things that make sense. Don't use the add method to multiply, and don't overload the index operator to multiply either. Use the multiplication operator for that. And just to demonstrate something here, if I say C1 operator plus C2, and that's equal to something, Or if I do C operator plus 1 num, that's equivalent to what we did below, and I'll show you that now. And you can see I get 3 if I add C1 and C2, and I get 11 if I do operator plus, or C1 operator plus num. So again, keep in mind that this right here is equivalent syntax to this. Okay, so let's add a different operator. Suppose we want to check to see, or let's suppose we want to compare the C1 and C2. So we could do something like if C1 is greater than C2, then Cout C1 is greater than C2. Else, we'll put the same thing, we'll just say is not greater. And then we can do the same thing here, or the same thing again in the opposite direction. Where we say if C1 is less than, and then instead of saying greater than, we'll say less than is less than. And so if I compile this, I'm going to get an error. But that error is going to tell me what operator I need to overload. And I think you may be able to already figure that out. No match for operator greater than, and also for less than. That's going to be a member of my class, because we're going to pass in, we'll call it from an object. We'll compare two objects of my class type together. We'll say my class operator, we start off with greater than. It's going to take a const my class reference to A, and then I'll implement it down here. So it just as a reminder, right, we just have the one integer here. We'll return the result. So it's a boolean, it's greater than, and it's going to return, or it takes a my class. I guess I should have used the addition operator overload. It's going to return this A greater than that A. And the reason is this returns a boolean, so it'll evaluate this and it'll return the result here. So that takes care of the first one. To do less than, I just need to change the direction of that operator, and I also need to update my forward declaration. And I also just noticed that those are going to return a Boolean type. So I think that should be good. Let's scroll down to where we're actually doing the code. And so 1 is not greater than 2, 1 is less than 2. So that's exactly what we would expect. Other than, I think we can clean up our output a little bit. So there's an example of using operators. And again, you want to use these wisely. If you're not careful, you can make your code harder to understand. But here we're using operators that allow us to take objects of some type, use them with operators. We've defined the operations in a way that makes sense. C1 plus C2 adds two numbers. C1 compared to C2 compares two numbers. And By doing that, it allows us to write code that's cleaner, as long as our overloaded operators do something that makes sense based on the type of operator they are.